She had a certain quality, bubbly, unrestrained, and much more audacious. You are aware of the kind. With kombucha in hand, yoga at dawn. Most likely has never seen a mink coat before, and if she did, she wouldn't be caught dead in one. Yes, Boulder was beautiful, but it was a far cry from the world we were used to. We were coffee, briefcase, suit and tie folks. Boulder was more interested in crystal healing and going barefoot. John Ramsey came next. He was the first to discover JonBenet, and he had a quiet, unreadable expression that made others pause and ask themselves, what's going on in this guy's head? The entire murder scene was destroyed when they picked her up and held her. Evidence preservation is no longer an option. Strangely enough, the police didn't really question him about it though. It seems strange that they didn't do Patty the way they did Burke. He was the one in charge, the head of the household after all. However, he was perceived by some as a melancholy, unimportant father in the background. Was he only that? A distraught father trapped in a bad dream? Or did he have far more knowledge than he disclosed? Who exactly is John Ramsey then? Let's go back a bit. Lincoln, Nebraska is the birthplace of JonBenet Ramsey. He wasn't merely a wealthy man with an air of mystery. He was also intelligent. After graduating from Michigan State with a degree in electrical engineering in 1966, he returned in 1971 to earn an MBA. Not bad, isn't it? After beginning his career in the Navy, he joined the Civil Engineer Corps, served for 3 years in the Philippines, and then remained in Atlanta for an additional 8 years in the reserves. And he's not just any pilot, he has a license. He had 2 private aircraft. You're either a huge aviation enthusiast, or you simply detest standing in TSA lines when you own 2 planes. His family was in the military. James J. Ramsey, his father, flew with distinction during World War II. Mary Jane was his mother. His early years were affected by Nebraska, and he went on to create what appeared to be the ideal life: work, finances, and family. Of course, though, looks can be deceiving, and that's the big question in John's situation. Was he simply the unfortunate individual at the epicenter of a national catastrophe? Or did he play a bigger role than anyone ever thought? There were layers to John Ramsey's personal life. In 1966, he married Lucinda Pash for the first time. John Andrew, Elizabeth, and Melinda were their 3 children together. Before they weren't, everything appeared to be fine. After almost 11 years, they broke up in 1978. We are not aware of any significant scandals. It was just one of those splits in which the public was never truly informed of the specifics. 2 years later, in 1980, John marries Patty Ramsey. Patsy, the former beauty queen, had a larger presence and a wide smile. Burke and JonBenet Patricia Ramsey, their youngest child, were born on August 6, 1990. One of America's most talked about mysteries would eventually revolve around that young child with the blonde locks. John wasn't a hands-off, very busy at work kind of dad. He showed up, paid the bills, and supported his children's activities. The Ramseys were residing in a large, exquisite home on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado. By 1996, John had established a respectable profession for himself. He founded Advanced Product Group, a tech startup, in 1989. Later, it became Access Graphics, after merging with a few other companies. The business not only expanded under John's direction as CEO, but also took off. Access Graphics had earned more than $1 billion by 1996. Billion. His success wasn't limited to numbers, however. That same year, he was named the Boulder Chamber of Commerce's Entrepreneur of the Year. By May 96, he had a net worth of almost $6.4 million, and he got a $118,000 bonus a few weeks before Christmas. Most folks don't see that type of money for 10 years. On top of his usual payday, he saw it. John was more than simply a businessman, though. He and his family had a reputation for attending church and community gatherings around the holidays, particularly at Boulder Street, John's Episcopal Church. It's safe to assume that they were the type of family that participated, smiled for pictures, and exuded joyous family energy, even though there isn't an official list of the events they attended in the days leading up to Christmas. Things weren't exactly as ideal, even behind the scenes. Money, titles, and picture-perfect mansions don't necessarily tell the whole story. As we all know, John was more than just the owner of a multi-million-dollar business. He also made an appearance as a father, particularly in relation to JonBenet's pageants. Patty was now in charge of most of the hairspray, glitter, and strict scheduling. In her day, she was the pageant queen. However, John was undoubtedly involved. He came there, whether it was by sitting through practices, supporting her from the sidelines, or grinning brightly in the front row. Even a local Boulder mall hosted an appearance by JonBenet just before Christmas. John was probably present as well. His attendance at these functions wasn't only ceremonial. It was one way Dad provided for his children. Even though he was the CEO, he was still a father with a front row seat and a camcorder. John was also closely associated with Boulder's upper class outside of the pageants. He and Patty interacted with families, such as the Whites and the Steins, and were part of the town's social scene. 2 days before everything would alter, on December 23, 1996, the Rams went to a Christmas party at Fleet and Priscilla White's house. The guest list is bolder and more well-designed. In terms of social standing, that night was significant for the Ramseys. They had thrown their own holiday party at their 15th Street home before traveling to the White House. Their apartment was packed with 30 to 40 visitors, friends, family, and children, wearing Christmas sweaters between 5 and 8:00 p.m. Bill McReynolds, a Santa lookalike, even stopped by to heighten the Christmas atmosphere. Everything looked picture perfect as the adults socialized and the children constructed gingerbread houses. When Patty gave JonBenet a gold bracelet inscribed with her name and the date, December 25, 1996, it was one very memorable moment, a charming small Christmas memento that now has a tragic symbolic meaning. John had been planning their trip, as if they already had enough on their plate. After Christmas, the Ramseys were going to take a plane to Cherrivoire, Michigan, where they owned a vacation house, to visit John's older children from his first marriage, John, Andrew, and Melinda. John had made arrangements to fly the family himself because he was a qualified pilot. Traditional Ramsey, combining some luxury with family time. Overall, the days before Christmas were quite busy. Plans for work, family, parties, and travel. A whirlwind occurred. Everything appeared content and joyful on the surface. However, as we all know, that idyllic life would eventually come to an end. Thus, on Christmas Day 1996, the Ramsey household appeared to be operating as usual. Their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet, was dressed up in a pretty black and white ensemble, and was likely flaunting a brand new bracelet that she had recently received as a present. Rob Brown, Priscilla White's parents, and Cliff Gaston, a man close to the family, were among the acquaintances that the family invited over. The father, John Ramsey, was present because he was hosting, so he was presumably mingling, but his actions that day don't really stick out. Then, however, an odd incident occurred that night. At approximately 6:48 p.m., they made a 911 call from their home. Before anyone could say anything, it was cut off. No one answered when the police called again, so they dispatched an officer to investigate. Susan Stein, a family friend, informed the police that it was most likely an error. Perhaps someone was attempting to place an order for medicine for an elderly family member. The officer left without filing a report, because it didn't seem urgent at the moment. The remainder of Christmas was ordinary. The family had dinner, opened presents, and JonBenet received a bike, all the customary holiday fare. After all the commotion, John claimed to have carried JonBenet to bed later that evening. Nothing actually proves that John was the one who gave her the pineapple, though there is a hypothesis that she may have had some that evening. The morning of December 26th then arrived. This is the point at when everything shifts. Patty got up to make coffee at around 5:30 a.m. Later that day, they were scheduled to take a plane to Charlevoix, Michigan. John intended to fly the family himself in his own private aircraft. However, Patty discovered her bed was vacant shortly after she woke up, and went to see how JonBenet was doing. She panicked, of course. She discovered a handwritten ransom note on a back staircase a short while later. It was 3 pages lengthy, and asked for a strangely precise sum of money, exactly the same amount John had just been given as a Christmas bonus. According to the note, JonBenet had been abducted. Patty hurried to inform John right once, and the two of them hurriedly looked around the house. JonBenet is not there. Burke, their kid, was still asleep when they peeked in. Then Patty dialed 911 at 5:52 a.m. Since then, the call has been dissected. Patty began by providing their address, rather than immediately explaining what was wrong. That might just be her attempting to be more efficient. However, some believe it sounded strange, as if she was reading from a script. Instead of saying, "My daughter has been taken," she explained, "We have a kidnapping." Small things like these gave the impression that she was separating herself from the real situation. She didn't even mention that her kid was missing during the call. Instead, she continued to concentrate on the ransom note. That also seemed strange, as if the note were more significant than the child. Additionally, she kept using our daughter, or we instead of my daughter, which gave the impression that she was strangely aloof. Additionally, others noticed that she frequently used the polite phrase please, which some perceived as forced, almost as if she was making an effort to appear offended. She never asked the dispatcher questions like what should I do? Or how do I get her back? What's even more worrisome is that she didn't even bring up the notes cautioning against calling the police, which would have been a major source of anxiety for any parent. The call line remained open for a few more seconds after she hung up. In fact, you can hear background voices. Some others believe they were speaking to Burke, which is troubling because they said he was asleep during the entire incident. One sounds like John stating, "We're not speaking to you." Another is likely Patty asking repeatedly, "What did you do?" Was the call genuine, or was it a hoax? That remains a significant question. In any case, John first appeared cooperative when the cops arrived. He provided them with the ransom note, responded to certain inquiries, and even summoned pals, Fleet and Priscilla White, to lend them a hand. Those buddies entered the residence before it was secured as a crime scene, which was the issue. Some even moved items around or cleaned the kitchen, which greatly alarmed the investigators. Given that the memo explicitly instructed not to contact anyone, why let individuals in? However, it could have simply been a stress response. In situations like that, people don't always think clearly. However, this is the section that truly caused people to take notice. Although the cops searched the entire morning, they did not thoroughly inspect the basement. The lead investigator then requested that John and Fleet conduct one more walkthrough. At roughly 1:00 p.m., they immediately headed to the basement's back room, which served as a storage space for Christmas-related items. John discovered JonBenet's body there. She had a garrote around her neck and duct tape on her mouth while she lay on the floor beneath a white blanket. John cried and screamed as he lifted her up and carried her upstairs. Near the Christmas tree, he placed her down. Moving the body turned out to be a major problem. DNA, fingerprints, location, and other possible evidence were all disturbed, and his subsequent interactions with the detective gave her the uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. She then said that she got chills from a silent glance between them. Suspicion and intrigue have surrounded the case ever since. There has been years of conjecture, but no true resolution, as a result of the way the call was handled. The scene was managed, and people behaved. We are still mostly in the dark about JonBenet Ramsey's fate. According to the FBI, it was abnormally lengthy. The majority of ransom messages are brief and direct. It read more like a performance in this instance. Behavioral analysts even detected a mother tone, as if the author was familiar with the family. Naturally, Patty was suspected. Although handwriting analysis did not prove she wrote it, it also did not rule her out. Burke, their kid, and John were exonerated. However, it all felt manufactured, because the note was written inside the house, and no kidnapper ever called or made contact again, suggesting that it was designed to hide something far darker. There were others, however, who countered. What if someone had sneaked in, waited for the right moment, and took their sweet time writing that note? What if they knew exactly what they were doing? Later that day, JonBenet herself, only 6 years old, was discovered dead in their basement. The autopsy revealed that she had been strangled with a homemade gar made from a piece of a broken paintbrush that belonged to Patty. Her body had been positioned neatly, partially covered with a white blanket. It wasn't just thrown somewhere. It was arranged, which some think demonstrates guilt, while others say it demonstrates familiarity. Her skull was also cracked, and there were indications of sexual assault, though no semen was discovered. Then there was the pineapple. According to JonBenet, she must have eaten something between 1000 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. But both John and Patty stated she hadn't eaten anything that evening. Experts say the partial covering is more typical when a killer experiences a mixture of shame and detachment. Even John's response that day when he found her, when he carried her upstairs, got people talking. Burke's fingerprints were discovered on a bowl of pineapple in the kitchen, and while no one could be certain when those prints were left, it added another odd layer of mystery. Was she awake that night eating with her brother? Did something happen then? Some investigators believed he had intentionally disturbed the scene. But again, imagine this. A father discovers his daughter dead, alone in a basement. Can you really blame him for losing it? This case is even more complicated because, although there is a lot of evidence that suggests an outsider broke in, there is also a lot that suggests someone was inside the house. Let's talk about the DNA. It was a huge deal, because the district attorney publicly cleared the family in 2008 after unidentified male DNA was discovered in several locations on JonBenet's underwear. leggings, and even under her fingernails. The DNA didn't match John, Burke, or Patty, and it didn't match anyone in the FBI's criminal database. In 2024, John pushed for advanced genealogical testing, in the hopes that perhaps, just possibly, science would finally solve this mystery. Some experts continued to debate that move, wondering if the DNA could have been from the clothing manufacturer, while others argued that theory didn't hold water. The samples were complex and might have even come from more than one person. Every response, however, only raised more concerns. The thing that still chills people is the moment John Ramsey discovered his daughters dead in the basement. Almost 30 years have passed, but the location and circumstances of that incident still seem odd because of this. Instead of wandering aimlessly around the house, John made his way directly to the basement, not just the basement, but a small, secret room in the far corner, which was quiet, dark, and hardly used, and it was also where JonBenet was. Some people thought that was a bit too convenient, and some experts, particularly in the CBS documentary, questioned whether he already knew where to look for her. They even asked whether the entire search was a publicity stunt. But let's stop there for a moment, because when John came upstairs with her body in his arms, crying and in a panic, what you saw wasn't a man acting. Rather, it was a broken father who had lost his daughter. And no matter how you interpret that grief, it appeared to be very real. Everything in this case feels tangled. But the ransom note is where things start to get really strange. First of all, since it was written inside the house and was 3 pages long, who takes the time to write a novel during a kidnapping? Everything felt strange, and when the police first arrived, they thought it was a kidnapping. That's what the note said, after all, so they handled it like that, so the house wasn't locked down. People went through it, friends came over, evidence was handled, moved, and possibly even lost. And when John was later found carrying JonBenet upstairs from the basement, he unintentionally moved the body, potentially destroying important evidence. There were also other odd details, like a flashlight on the counter, that might have been the weapon used to hit her but had no fingerprints, blood or DNA, and a rope discovered in a guest room that no one in the family recognized. However, was that deliberate? Or was that a father who had just discovered his little girl and had no idea what else to do? The one thing that keeps hope alive is the male DNA on her leggings, under her nails, and on her underwear, which didn't match JonBenet, Burke, or anyone else in the FBI's database. There was also a boot print in the basement that didn't belong to anyone who lived there. And even a pubic hair on the blanket didn't match anyone in the family. The district attorney publicly cleared the entire family in 2008 based on that DNA, saying this came from someone else. In 2024, John pushed for new genealogical testing, in the hopes that perhaps, just possibly, DNA could do what detectives were never able to do: bring his daughter justice. "We believe you," he said, but not everyone agreed. Some thought the DNA might have come from the factory that made the clothes, while others thought it belonged to the real killer. A broken basement window? Was it the intruder's entry point, or just a red herring? Were the marks on her body unusual? Were they stun gun wounds or something else? And that 911 call? Patty sounded panicked and scared, but some audio experts later claimed that faint voices were still audible after the call ended. At the heart of all of this is John Ramsey. His actions, his grief, his choices. He found the body. The note mentioned his bonus. He moved her. And yet none of the physical evidence ever linked him to anything. One of them, perhaps even Burke, even though the family claimed he was asleep. Was that a technical error, or did it mean someone was lying? Every clue points in 2 different directions, making everyone feel both innocent and suspicious at the same time. This is what makes this case so haunting. Even after all these years, JonBenet's story continues to reverberate among her family, investigators, and those of us who are still looking for answers. Because, despite what we believe to be true, this case is still just out of grasp.